A stranger was found in the forest, on the brink of death. And that day, both her fate and a lonely farmer's life changed forever. This isn't just a story of rescue. It's a story of holding on to life, all over again. We're just a few steps away from reaching 1,500 subscribers, and we'd be honored to have you with us. Thank you to every kind soul who's joined us so far. With your support, we share peaceful, heartfelt stories that warm the soul. If you enjoy calm, meaningful stories, don't forget to subscribe. You're part of this family now. Now, make yourself comfortable. It's time for the story. Jonas Keller opened the wooden door with a heavy creak just as the first light of morning broke. The pale sun hadn't yet risen over the mountains, but the air was biting cold. He raised his hand to shield his eyes and looked out at the horizon. Faint white mist was spread across the land. On the farm where he lived alone, silence pulsed like the heartbeat of time. He checked his horse's saddle with his cracked hands and set off with a deep sigh. His dark brown mare, Luna, stepped cautiously but with determination, leaving tracks on the icy ground. Jonas was heading down to check the fences in the lower valley. But his planned route changed when Luna suddenly stopped. Her ears perked up and steam poured from her nostrils. Then, without any hesitation, she turned left. Jonas didn't say a word about his horse's sudden change of direction. They'd been together for years. Luna sometimes sensed things people couldn't see or feel. And that morning, she felt something again. Just ahead, hidden among the thorny bushes, something caught the eye, a strange splash of red. But it wasn't blood. It was fabric. Jonas got off his horse, and his boots crunched on the snow. He slowly approached the bushes. At first, it just looked like a heap. But then his heart began to race. It was a person, a young woman, maybe in her early 20s. Her body was partly buried in the snow, arms pulled tightly around her knees. Her clothes were torn, and one of her feet was bare. A thin wool shawl was barely clinging to her shoulder, fluttering in the wind. Jonas immediately knelt down and reached for her pulse. It was weak, but it was there. Her lips were cracked, her red, wet hair stuck to her cheeks. He noticed an old notebook clutched tightly to her chest. Gently, trying not to hurt her delicate fingers, Jonas took it from her. Inside were drawings, and one of them looked almost exactly like his cabin. Was it just a coincidence that she came here? He couldn't waste time. He took off his coat and wrapped her gently. As he lifted her, he realized how light she was. It was as if even her bones were frozen. Luna stood still as Jonas placed her behind the saddle. The way back was slower, but this wasn't just a physical journey, it was something deeper. Questions began spinning in Jonas's head. Who was this woman? Why was she wandering these mountains alone, nearly frozen to death? When they reached the cabin, Jonas pushed the door open with his shoulder. The room wasn't warm, but filled with the smell of ashes. Among the pale embers of the dead fire, there was still a bit of life left. Jonas laid the woman down on the fur rug. Then he moved quickly, broke wood, made tea, pulled out thick blankets. But she still hadn't woken up. Her pulse was weak, her breathing deep but slow. Jonas placed the notebook near the stove to dry. One of the pages fluttered open. There was a drawing of a horse. White, noble, familiar. Was it Luna? He sat by her side all night. The wind howled over the roof, and snow fell gently outside. And finally, just as the sun rose, the woman stirred. Her eyes opened slowly. At first, she stared into nothing. Then at Jonas. Her lips parted, but her voice was barely there. Home, she said. Just one word. But it echoed in Jonas's heart. He didn't respond. He just poured the tea, supported her head, and helped her drink slowly. When she fell asleep again, Jonas reached for the notebook. He turned the pages carefully. Most drawings were of nature, but a few clearly showed a structure, a cabin, a man, and a horse. Had this woman seen this place before? Or had she dreamed it? That night, after building up the fire, Jonas wrapped her feet in his thick socks. In his chest, he felt something. Something he hadn't felt in years. Was it compassion or a delicate thread of fate? But Jonas Keller didn't know yet. This woman hadn't come just to escape the cold. She had brought with her the beginning of a story, one that would shake his quiet life, unearth the pain he'd buried in the past, and reignite a hope he thought he'd long forgotten. And in this story, a past as sharp as snow and as burning as fire was waiting for them both. When morning came, Jonas was watching the first ray of light fall across the woman's face in the slowly warming room. The weight of the night still hung on his shoulders, but he couldn't take his eyes off her. The tea in the old mug he held had long gone cold. The paleness in the woman's face had faded a little, and her breathing was more steady. Even that small sign of recovery was enough to give shape to the uncertain feelings inside Jonas. He didn't know this woman, but the idea of leaving her behind no longer seemed possible. Around noon, the woman opened her eyes again. Her gaze was still distant, as if she had come from another time. Jonas crouched down, close enough to be at eye level. "What's your name?" he asked softly. At first, she didn't answer. Then, in a faint whisper, she said, "Elena. Elena Hartman." And then she closed her eyes again, as if even saying that had drained all her strength. Jonas repeated the name to himself a few times. It didn't sound familiar. Still, there was a strange sense of closeness to it. The days that followed passed with Elena slowly getting better. Jonas never left her side, made her food, kept the fire going, and left her notebook by the stove to dry. When Elena began speaking, she said very little. But when Jonas looked into her eyes, he could feel that behind every word was an untold novel. On the third day, Elena stood up for the first time. Holding onto the walls, she walked over to the window. She stared outside for a long while. The snow had begun to melt, but the ground was still frozen. She pressed her fingers against the cold glass, as if she still wanted to feel the chill outside. Jonas stood in the doorway, quietly watching her. The striped dress she wore was one of Jonas's old shirts, too big, but warm. And for the first time, Elena moved freely beside him without hesitation. That night, something caught Jonas's attention. Elena had fallen asleep by the stove. There was a new drawing on the open notebook in front of her. A man, a woman, and a small table in a garden in front of the cabin. A cup on the table, a pen in the woman's hand. There were no faces, but Jonas could tell who the figures were. She had drawn him. She had seen him. Really seen him. "Is this us?" Jonas asked quietly as he sat down in the chair. Elena opened her eyes and smiled shyly. "No," she said. "It's who we want to be." And then she closed her eyes again, as if she had just made a confession. As the days went by, Elena's presence began to settle into the cabin. Without realizing it, Jonas started making a second cup of tea. The small blue blanket with flowers stayed by the stove. Even Luna seemed more at peace when Elena was around. Everything was quietly changing, and the fabric of Jonas's long-held loneliness was slowly unraveling. But that peace didn't last long. One morning, while Jonas was checking the fences, he found fresh tracks along the path at the edge of the forest. Horse hoof prints, and a pair of boot prints. Recent ones, not from an ordinary traveler someone was searching or following. Jonas followed the tracks, but they disappeared after a while. That familiar feeling of unease had returned. When he got back, Elena was sitting on the porch. She wasn't drawing this time. Her hands were clasped in her lap, and her face was filled with worry. "Is something wrong?" Jonas asked. Elena shook her head. "No," she said, but her voice didn't sound convincing. "I just had a strange dream today." Jonas leaned closer, looking into her eyes. "What kind of dream?" Elena didn't answer, but Jonas knew something had changed. The silence no longer felt peaceful. It was the warning before a coming storm. And Jonas could feel the old instinct to protect, the one he thought he'd buried years ago, stirring back to life. The next day, the air felt heavier. The sky was covered in lead-gray clouds, and the wind had changed direction. Jonas had gotten up early, rekindled the fire, and made something warm for Elena. But she hadn't come to the kitchen. Quietly, she had stepped out onto the porch and was sitting in her chair, staring blankly at her notebook. She wasn't drawing, just flipping through the pages and then closing it again. Jonas brought her coffee and placed it in front of her. "Elena, if something's wrong, someone might be looking for me," she said suddenly, her voice cracked. The cup paused in Jonas's hand. "Before I came here, I was running from something, but I'm not even sure who or what it really was anymore. I just wanted to break away from a life that wasn't mine." Her eyes welled up, but she didn't cry. Jonas placed his hands over hers. "I may not know who you are, but I know you can stay here." But those words weren't enough to calm the storm inside Elena. That afternoon, when Jonas went to draw water from the old well near the forest's edge, he noticed the tracks had been refreshed. The same boots, same direction, but this time closer. Someone was really coming. He rushed back to the cabin. Elena was inside, staring out the window. "I have to leave," she said before Jonas could speak. It's not because of you. But if I stay, I'll put you in danger too. Jonas's voice was cold but firm. I don't let people into my home easily, Elena. But I let you in. And now, I can't let you just walk out. Silence lingered. Then Jonas opened an old chest and took out a pistol. It hadn't been touched in a long time, but it still worked. Just to scare them, he said, though it wasn't clear if he meant it for himself or for Elena. As the night went on, the wind grew stronger. Branches creaked around the cabin, and the animals grew restless. Luna was pacing in the barn. Before going to bed, Jonas checked all the doors twice, laid old blankets in front of the windows, and piled wood into the stove. But in the middle of the night, a sound was heard. A creak, then a footstep. Jonas jumped out of bed and grabbed the gun. Elena was already awake, standing, her eyes fixed on the door in terror. Jonas raised a finger to his lips. Be quiet. He slowly approached the door, hand reaching for the handle, but someone outside moved first. A slow, heavy knock, then silence, then a voice. Elena Hartman. We know you're in there. We just want to talk. Open the door. Jonas's throat tightened. Elena stepped back, her eyes wide. It's them, she whispered. They want to take me back. My father. His debts, his schemes. He promised me to someone. I ran away because I wanted a different life. Jonas closed his eyes for a moment, then turned to the door. If you stay here, I'll protect you. But if you step outside, who knows what you'll face? Elena only nodded. Jonas moved to the door. There's no one here by that name, he said in a loud, clear voice. You've got the wrong place. The man outside spoke again. This can end easy. Just hand her over. Or we'll try something else. Then they left. But Jonas knew. That was just a warning. The real danger hadn't begun yet. Jonas couldn't sleep the rest of the night. Neither could Elena. She sat quietly by the window, eyes fixed outside, notebook closed in her lap. Jonas brought her a blanket. Then he whispered, I promise I won't let harm come to this place. Elena turned her head. You're the first person to ever say that to me, she said. But what about you? What if something happens to you? Jonas paused for a moment, then replied, I'm done living in silence. I choose to protect someone now, even if that someone is you. The next day, as the morning sun filtered through with a cold and pale light, Jonas was already outside. The ground was hard, but the sky was clear. Still, the peace of nature didn't reach either of them that morning. Elena stood in the doorway, watching Jonas. Her lips were pressed together, and her chin trembled slightly. This time, it wasn't from the cold. It was fear. Because the men who came the night before hadn't just knocked and left, they'd left a threat behind. If it doesn't go easy, we'll take her by force, they had said. And Jonas kept hearing those words over and over in his mind. He inspected the old fences behind the barn. Defending that spot was impossible, but setting temporary traps was doable. He didn't let Luna out. She's staying with us today, he told Elena. It's like she sensed something. She's gone quiet. Elena looked away. Luna. She's the one who found me, right? Jonas nodded. Yeah, it wasn't me, she chose you. That day, Jonas placed old bells, broken chains, and wires around the cabin. It was likely they'd come at night. Elena stayed inside and burned her drawings. One by one, she threw the pages into the stove. Jonas didn't ask, but he noticed. The way Elena was erasing traces of her past showed she didn't want to run anymore. Maybe she had decided to stay. But the past doesn't erase that easily. As evening fell and the fire was lit again, Jonas laid out a map on the floor. It was old, almost faded, but the area around the cabin was still visible. If they come, Jonas said, they'll try this slope first. It's the most covered spot. Elena looked at the map. You're preparing for war. Jonas sighed. No, I'm preparing to resist. Just then, a sound came from outside. Wheels. Hoofbeats hitting wooden ground. Jonas jumped to his feet, grabbed the rifle, and moved to the side of the door. Elena held her breath. No one knocked. Just a voice. If you're inside, I come as a friend. Please don't be afraid. Jonas cracked the door open. A middle-aged woman with a worn face was standing there. Beside her, a young man, and behind them, an old wagon. My name is Marlene, the woman said. I heard what happened last night. Staying silent when things like this happen around here is cowardice. I don't know Elena, but sometimes, when someone's in trouble, you just have to do something. Elena stepped outside quietly. She locked eyes with the woman. It didn't feel like they didn't know each other. It was as if their pasts had crossed at some distant point. Marlene turned to Jonas. You're not alone anymore. We have a say in this too. Jonas felt something he hadn't in a long time. The feeling of being part of a community. Loneliness was slowly being replaced by responsibility. Marlene didn't stay long. But before leaving, she said this. If they come back, this time they won't just face one man. They'll face a will. When night fell, Jonas and Elena were sitting on the doorstep. Neither of them spoke. As a few stars appeared in the sky, Elena slowly rested her head on Jonas's shoulder. For the first time, I'm starting to feel like I belong somewhere, she said. Jonas turned his head. This is your home, he said. Even if you had somewhere else to go, this is your place. But after those words, the cloud of dust rising from the east, carried by the wind, was a sign of a new threat approaching. One of them was determined to return tonight. And this time, he wouldn't come alone. When Jonas went inside, he was silent. He checked his rifle. All the bullets were in place. Then he pulled out an old box. Inside, he found a note hidden in a leather wallet his mother had given him years ago. Everything you protect reminds you of who you are. Jonas squeezed the note in his hand. Then he looked at Elena. Are you ready? He asked. Elena took a deep breath. I'm scared, she said, but I'm not running anymore. And for the first time, she placed her hand firmly into his. The darkness of night was quieter than the morning, but it was the kind of silence that comes right before an explosion. At dawn, the sun had not yet appeared, but the sky had turned a shade of lead, like a warning of coming chaos. Jonas stood on the cabin porch, rifle in hand, eyes on the horizon. Elena was inside, sitting quietly in a chair by the window, almost as if in prayer. The tea had gone cold, and the stove was beginning to fade. But no one was thinking about warmth. Because this morning, everything would either end or begin. In the distance, hoofbeats echoed. This time they moved with a slow, intimidating confidence. A cloud of dust rose. The horses appeared. For men, all in black coats, their faces determined. At the front, the voice from the night before the familiar one. Jonas narrowed his eyes. The man spoke before dismounting. Jonas Keller. Let's end this before it gets bigger. The girl is coming with us. Inside, Elena stood up. She watched from behind the glass. Her eyes locked onto a single point. Jonas stepped forward. She doesn't belong to anyone now, he said. She makes her own choices. The man dismounted, followed by the others. There was a fake politeness on his face. Look, we can settle this before it gets worse. Just hand her over. You'll get your money. We'll be on our way. Jonas shook his head. I stand against anything that can be bought with money, especially a woman's freedom. The man smiled, but it was cold as ice. I pity men like you, clinging to dreams and forgetting reality. He reached into his pocket. Jonas moved his finger closer to the trigger. But just then, a door creaked inside. Elena had stepped out. Her face was pale, but her eyes were steady. I'm here, she said, her voice calm but clear. But I'm not going anywhere. The man approached her. This isn't what you want, I know. He's tricked you. Elena held her head high. No, I made my own decision. I'm here because I want to be, and I'm no longer afraid to say what I ran from. Jonas took a step back, letting Elena speak for herself. She continued, my father sold me off like a piece of debt, forced me to marry a man. When I said no, they called me crazy. Then they accused me of stealing. But all I did was run. And now you want to drag me back. But I'm not afraid anymore. A silence fell. The wind picked up slightly. The man didn't look away from her for several seconds. Then he tilted his head. So that's your final word. His hand moved toward his gun just as Jonas pulled the trigger. The gunshot echoed through the mountains. Jonas had fired upward, a warning. But one of the men quickly fired back. The bullet struck the post just beside Jonas's shoulder. Elena ducked. It all happened in seconds. Jonas straightened and raised his rifle again, but at that moment, another voice rang out. Enough, shouted the voice of an older woman. 5 people emerged from the forest's edge. Marlene led them. Behind her, young villagers, some with rifles, others holding only axes. We live on this land too, she shouted. We won't let you take anyone by force. The man was stunned. The others stepped back. This isn't your concern, one of them yelled. It is now, said Marlene. We've been silent too long. But this girl didn't come here alone. She woke us up too. Those words echoed like a chain through the clearing. Jonas took a step forward. If your idea of justice is forcing a woman into a life she doesn't want, Then we reject that justice. The first to lower his weapon was the younger man. His eyes met Elena's. Then, slowly, he stepped back. The leader looked around. They were outnumbered not in bodies, but in will. Then this isn't over, he said in a threatening tone. It is, said Jonas, his voice now solid as stone. Because we're not alone anymore. The man turned, climbed onto his horse. The others followed. They disappeared into the dust. But the tension on Jonas's shoulders didn't lift. Elena looked at him. Is it really over? Jonas stared at the horizon. No, he said. But we're done running. As the sun set, the villagers quietly left one by one. Elena sat on the porch. Jonas went to the barn and stroked Luna's head. You brought us here, he said softly. Now we'll learn to stay. And that night, as Jonas and Elena sat by the fire, there was a new kind of silence between them. Not the silence of escape, not the silence of fear, but the silence of two people preparing to put down roots. The morning that followed the night was unusually quiet. The birds were singing, but cautiously. The wind was blowing, but gently. It was as if even nature was trying to shake off the weight of the night before. Jonas greeted the morning in the barn. While tending to Luna, he paused, pressed his palms against the hay-covered wood, and took a deep breath. Even though the men had retreated, there was still a storm rumbling inside him. Because the real threat didn't come with weapons, it came with fears that hadn't been forgotten. Elena, on the other hand, was inside, back at the table with her sketchbook open again. This time not with burning pages, but with ones being reborn. She was drawing flowers, earth, women, and a wooden house. But one figure stood out, a man with his back turned, holding a hoe. And next to him, a woman sitting down holding a notebook. After breakfast, Jonas stepped out onto the porch. Elena followed with a cup in her hand. If we hadn't been through all this, she said slowly, I never would have thought of staying here. But now, I can't imagine being anywhere else. Jonas turned his head. I never used to let anyone in so easily either. But now, I don't want to close my door again. That day they went for a walk. To the edge of the forest, to the spot where Elena had first been found. Where the thorny bushes still stood. Elena slowed down. Right here, she said. That day, I didn't have a single piece of life left in me. I was just listening to the wind. But when that horse, Luna, came up to me, it felt like life returned. Jonas bowed his head. That day changed everything for me too. Years buried in silence were broken by your breath. They both knelt and cleared away some of the brush. Elena found an old piece of cloth. It was red, faded, but somehow still alive. She folded it and put it in her bag. Whatever's part of my past, I'll carry it with me now. I'm not afraid of it anymore. Weeks passed. Spring settled deeply into the land. Jonas built a small greenhouse next to the house for Elena. Elena planted seeds, tomatoes, sage, mint, and though she never said it aloud, a bit of lavender. Jonas replaced the planks in front of the house, sanded the window frames, painted the cabin. On the top corner of the wall, he nailed a small wooden sign Elena had made, Quiet Shelter. The villagers started visiting regularly. Some brought eggs, some brought plates of pastries. Marlene came by every week, bringing books for Elena. One day, she turned to Jonas and said, You didn't just open your heart, you opened this house. And now, something else is growing here. And it did grow. One morning, while Elena was sitting at the table, she turned to Jonas and said, Maybe we should write a story together. Jonas smiled. We already are. That summer, every evening at sunset, they sat on the porch sipping tea in silence. They didn't talk much, but every word mattered. Elena sometimes read books. Jonas would tell her stories about chopping wood. But more than anything, it was the trust in the silence between them that grew. Elena started drawing not just the past, but the future. Childlike figures, more than 2 chairs, a table covered in flowers. And one evening, Jonas brought out his old box. Inside, he had a simple silver ring he had shaped himself. He held it out to Elena. I'm not looking for ceremony, he said, but I want to step into the future with you. Elena's hands trembled as she took the ring and slid it on her finger. You already became home, she said. This just gave it a name. That night the stars were especially bright. As they sat by the fire, Elena rested her head on Jonas's shoulder. When I first came here, I thought I was going to die, she said. But now, it feels like I was born again. Jonas wrapped his arm around her. That's why Luna brought you there, he said softly. Because life offers a second path even to those about to die, if they have the courage. And that night, the heart of a lonely farmer was no longer alone. By the way, we noticed something small. Most people who watch these stories aren't actually subscribed to the channel. Maybe we get caught up in the moment, or just forget to hit the button. But your support truly helps us keep creating stories like this. If this story moved you, don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel.